So I'd like to introduce you to what I believe is the best starter Necromancer build, and one that I think that will be able to scale very well. Actually, at this point, I don't currently have any aspects that scale my primary damage output, so keep that in mind. But what I have here is the Blood Surge Corpse Explosion Necromancer. So I'm going to do an entire dungeon run just so you can kind of see it in action. Then I'll go over our skill tree to show you the decisions that we made, go through the Book of the Dead and the decisions that we made there as well, and then I'll show you my gear, which is literally just a random collection of stuff that I picked up along the way, with a few synergistic aspects tossed in, but again, with nothing that actually directly scales the primary damage dealer of this build, which is the Corpse Explosion itself. On our skill bar, we're using 1 point Hemorrhage as our resource generator, we're using Blood Surge as our primary damage dealer, or the first wave of damage before bodies are on the ground, so that we can use our Corpse Explosion domino. To that same effect, we're using Corpse Explosion, Corpse Tendrils for CC, survivability, as well as increasing our Corpse Explosion damage, but we'll go over that in just a little bit in the skills section. Then I am using Raised Skeleton. We're using both the Reapers as well as the primary Shadow Mages, and then lastly we're using Decrepify. Let's go ahead and just do a run. I'll kind of talk through what the gameplay looks like. The major damage dealer here is our Blood Surge. This is how we actually get damage onto the field, as well as put the initial bodies on the ground so that we can inevitably come through with Corpse Explosion to clean up. This is definitely an AoE damage focused build. It's one of the many reasons why I actually continue to use the summons of the Necromancer, is because we needed a little bit of help in single target damage, especially on bosses and elites where they're not just going to die in 1 to 2 corpse explosions. I wanted to be able to continue to stack on damage to them while we were going. The gameplay is pretty simple. If you do not have Essence to be able to cast Blood Surge, you go through and use Hemorrhage a little bit. Hemorrhage also has an enhancement which makes it an AoE damage skill, which is pretty nice. It'll help to add on a little bit of additional AoE. For elites here, we want to have Decrepify up, not only to slow them and decrease the damage that they do, but also to increase the damage that they'll take from Corpse Explosion, since we picked up Plagued Corpse Explosion, which just means that if they have CC slow or a vulnerable status on, you'll do more damage to them. I kind of don't want to show it with a channel shrine up. I did not read what this shrine was, so we'll kind of just hang around. The primary gameplay, like I said, is toss up a Blood Surge. This should hit everything. Start the general domino of Corpse Explosion, and then again, whenever you don't have those options, like against this single tanky monster, just throw in a few Hemorrhages, and also get your skeletons into range so that they can start adding on a decent amount of damage. In a perfect world, elites would always have monsters around them so that you can Corpse Tendrils, drawing them in and applying vulnerables, so now our Hemorrhage as well as our Blood Surge is more effective as well. We're actually fairly tanky. Big benefit of Blood Surge is it's going to heal you for damage dealt according to max life, so you can kind of just walk up and face tank most things here and not really have to worry about it. There are options for being able to spec more into Fortify as well as Barrier, and I do have an aspect which gives us Barrier, but that's actually just to scale damage as opposed to actually increase survivability. I have yet to die. We got to level 25 in about 3.5 hours. We haven't hit any Qs yet today, and we do have full Renown as well as the full system of the Altar of Lilith up. But you get your things into range, you Hemorrhage. This guy didn't have any monsters near him, so it's a little bit harder to stack some damage onto that single target. But again, once your skeletons are kind of in range, you do more than enough damage to take down most things. Let's get into the rest of the dungeon. The only issue I've come across right now in the Necromancer is they just don't have any mobility. They don't have any mobility skills that you can easily get into, so you're kind of forced to just use your boots as additional sources of evade and hopefully have movement speed on your boots as well. And then this is kind of where the Necromancer really starts to shine. Areas with a ton of density and lower health monsters, because Corpse Explosion will just clear the entire screen for you. We also have multiple passives that help to lightly scale our Corpse Explosion damage, and then also just increase all damage after a corpse has been consumed. Consuming a corpse is using it for any skill that is labeled as a corpse skill. Although Corpse Tendrils actually does not consume the corpse itself, so those ones do not benefit from it. But there you go. Anytime you have a ton of density, this build like absolutely wrecks through it. And you actually like to see smaller minions, again, near tankier and more elite minions, because that helps you to generate corpses faster to get over to the corpse explosion, which is the real star of the show for the build.
I need time to do that.
Now that damage has kind of outpaced our ability to do anything with hemorrhage, hemorrhage is just kind of nice. And realistically, I'm using it to scale core damage a little bit. I might actually consider swapping over to Reap. Reap has an enhancement that just says once every 5 seconds you can create a corpse by hitting a monster. And I think that might be a little bit better for getting the domino going earlier rather than having to wait on using Blood Surge in every scenario. So here, the corpses are also really good for handling objectives of this nature where you can deal damage in an AoE. Anytime that you can actually stack up corpses, you'll notice that like your kill speed gets drastically better. And I would say it wasn't until level 25 where I hadn't found any gear pieces that actually helped to scale the corpse explosion damage that we ran into any kill speed slowing at all. You might actually believe that this build is kind of nutty when you see it in the super early game where all you have is like base level 1 corpse explosion and base level 1 blood surge. The damage output is kind of nutty. For scenarios where you know elite monsters are going to spawn, I actually like to try to keep up some corpses on the ground. Whenever you complete one of these, you'll notice that an elite spawns. I keep the corpses. This allows me to corpse explode more just to stack easier damage, which also gets me the essence that I need to then follow up with blood surge. There we go, just one more construct. Artillery Shrine, I'll show you this. Artillery Shrine with Corpse Explosion is actually kind of grody. This one, I don't know what they could do about it, but it gets kind of nuts kind of fast. Like, sure, you know, Conduit Shrine feels pretty good. Ultimately, it actually ends up doing like less damage than some of the stronger combinations you can get, even at this point in the beta. But Artillery on Blood Surge as well as Corpse Explosion is just absolutely disgusting. I think this one might need to be a little bit tuned down. It depends on how well shrines actually scale into the late game. Alright, let's go get the last construct. Again, it is going to be spawning in elite once we get there, so I just try to keep as many corpses on the ground as possible. This build definitely suffers from a lack of corpses when you can't manage to have any on the ground. That's why once we go into the skill section, you'll see all of the things I've spec'd into to try to alleviate that. And there you go. So pretty simple Mallwood run right there. And then let's go into the skill tree like I just said, so you can get a better idea of how we're building it and why we made the decisions that we did. And I'll try to remember level by level what I put into here. So it was level 1 hemorrhage, level 2 enhanced hemorrhage, and then we go down into our second skill node. You pick up level 1 blood surge, and then the enhanced blood surge, and then paranormal blood surge. The reason why this one's so important is it basically means every 5th blood surge that you do will be overpowered. So you're going to gain your overpowered damage and anything that scales with it, not only on the initial cast, but on the secondary, more powerful Nova. The way that blood surge works is it hits everything on the screen, and then based off of how many things it hits, it will heal you and then do an amount of damage in a smaller Nova around you. So it really benefits you to kind of be in the thick of things as often as you can, so that every monster is being hit by both damage components of blood surge itself. Then I actually went and picked up Acolyte's Hemorrhage. Acolyte's Hemorrhage just says basically all the time you have 20% increased attack speed, which just increases your resource generation. Again, Hemorrhage is not really doing damage at this point. It's purely utility for the essence generation. So I'm actually considering dropping over to Acolyte's Reap. This will just do a smaller kind of AoE damage attack in front of us. The damage isn't important. It's the creating a corpse under an enemy every 5 seconds. So if we walk up to an elite monster and we didn't have any corpses, we'll be able to target it with corpse tendrils, which we'll read later on, and then increase our corpse explosion damage at least one time, which is more than enough to kind of stack enough damage to be able to finish them with the blood surge. After that, we go down into corpse explosion. For a little bit, you can afford to only have 1 point into corpse explosion, and 1 point into Enhanced Corpse Explosion. Don't pick up Plagued Corpse Explosion until you have a way of applying Slow, Vulnerable, or Stun. We use both Decrepify and Corpse Tendrils for this purpose, but it's literally useless until you can do that, so hang on to that point. You have a couple different options here. You can either put your next point into Grim Harvest, which is going to give you Essence every time you consume a corpse, meaning that you don't have to use Hemorrhage anymore to generate Essence, you can just Corpse Explode instead, and then typically you'll have enough saved up to be able to finish off the rest of the screen, again with another Blood Surge. And then 1 point into Fueled by Death. This says whenever you consume a corpse, up to this value, so 8%, increase damage for 4 seconds. This will increase the damage of the next corpse explosion that you do. It'll increase the damage of both parts of the Blood Surge as long as they happen within its timer. But at least 1 point here, 1 point here, or putting your points into Blood Surge, whatever's required to get you down to Decrepify. Decrepify is just really nice for slowing monsters, which applies that CC, and then also reducing their damage done. At this point, you're not really worried about damage, but another great part about Decrepify is that any crowd control that you applied to an elite monster or a boss or the world boss applies Stagger, so you're able to spam this to apply Stagger. It does have a little bit of a cooldown for getting like the maximum benefit of Stagger effectiveness on it, but it's just nice to have something to be able to spam, especially in the world boss fight where you're probably not going to have a ton of corpses all the time. Once you do have Decrepify, you can go and pick up Plagued Corpse Explosion. This basically means that when an elite spawns, again, you want to make sure that Decrepify is up to apply that slow, and that means that you will just get a 10% X multiplier onto your Corpse Explosion damage, and again, that would apply for slow, stun, and vulnerable, so up to 30% increased damage for Corpse Explosion once you can apply all of them. Now that you're here, you could pick up Amplified Damage, you could pick up Death's Reach, and you could pick up Death's Embrace. All these things are going to help to scale your overall damage a little bit. I personally would recommend finishing maxing out Blood Surge and then maxing out Corpse Explosion so you can get the biggest benefit out of them possible, and by that time you should be able to come down into Corpse Tendrils. Corpse Tendrils is going to do a small little AoE of damage, and then pull every monster in, including elite monsters. For boss monsters, it will apply the vulnerable that we'll get from the second enhancement, and it'll apply Stagger, but it won't pull them. This is just incredibly important, again, to be able to help scale our Corpse Explosion damage from Plagued Corpse Explosion. Also, bringing all the monsters into one area means that all of their corpses are centralized so that when they die, you can continue to spam Corpse Explosion on that elite monster rather than them being slightly out of range and not being able to hit them with their AoE. Just 1 point Corpse Tendrils is absolutely good enough. You want to pick up Enhanced Corpse Tendrils, which means that you're also going to apply a slow as well as the stun that's just natural to the Corpse Tendrils, so we've already gained 2 of the modifiers for Plagued Corpse Explosion. And then the last enhancement applies Vulnerable. So not only does Vulnerable just increase damage that the monster takes by 20%, but that's the last modifier that we need for Plagued Corpse Explosion's total bonus. So Corpse Tendrils in these 2 points are pivotal for the build, to be able to max out your damage, again, especially against elites, where we kind of slow down in our DPS output. People were generally wondering about ultimate abilities. We don't have enough spaces on our skill bar to even be able to use any of them. And at this time, I don't consider any of them to be beneficial enough for this build where it really synergizes with the rest of what we're doing. I had considered Inspiring Leader after you have been healthy for an amount of time, which we're basically healthy all of the time since our Blood Surge is going to heal us. You and your minions gain increased attack speed. Attack speed determines how quickly you can cast your spells because it's all based off of your weapon speed, so that's just kind of nice. And then on top of that, our skeletons actually do a decent amount of damage for us. They're the last kind of piece of the puzzle to help us continuously put out DPS against any monster that doesn't immediately die to either the Blood Surge or the Corpse Explosion. You get the idea. We're just trying to minimize any weaknesses that the build might have, and this might be a place to put a point. There are a lot of different options. As far as passives, I ended up maxing out Hewed Flesh. This says Lucky Hit, 12% chance to create a corpse at the target location whenever I deal damage, and it's doubled against bosses. If you look at Corpse Explosion has Lucky Hit 41% chance, so that's pretty decent. It's a little bit less than half of the time you're going to be able to proc this, and then this means that 12% of a little bit less than half the time, you're going to get a corpse. And since you hit so many monsters, it has a chance to proc on all of them. The more corpses you can create, the better for the build. And this is, again, just trying to shore up a little bit of that inefficiency. If you really wanted to, you could just more directly scale your damage. So again, either putting them into amplify damage would get you up to 9% increased damage whenever you have decrepify up. You can put them into death's reach so that you're going to deal increased damage to distant monsters. Remember that blood surge is going to hit monsters on the entirety of the screen. So this would just be 12% increased damage to the first part of blood surge, basically. And then the other part to remember about distant enemies is that it's the distance from you to the enemy and not from the enemy to the damage source. So if there are monsters dying on the edge of the screen and you are corpse exploding their bodies, the monsters that are then hit by that radius are almost certainly considered to be distant. Now, if you're having trouble surviving, you can instead pick up Death's Embrace. Close enemies are going to take up to 6% if you put 3 points into this, more additional damage from you, and then they are going to deal 9% less damage. And since we do kind of want to be in their face for the second part of Blood Surge, I think that this would be a pretty good option that's kind of somewhere in the middle, where you kind of want to be in the mix of things as often as possible. So this is probably your best damage option, but really, any combination, either Grim Harvest, Fueled by Death, any one of these three options, and potentially Inspiring Leader, especially if you choose to opt for using your Golem instead of using Decrepify. For the Book of the Dead, we are using the Reapers. I think the Reapers just have the best damage output, and then their secondary enhancement is what's really important, is that each one of them has a 15% chance to generate a corpse when they attack a monster, and that's just really important, especially against a boss monster. Them walking up and just dealing damage has a chance to keep you supplied with corpses, so we can be using Corpse Explosion as often as possible. If I wasn't using this, I would almost certainly be sacrificing the Skirmishers for the crit chance. I don't think I'm currently scaling crit damage enough to be able to warrant this over the benefit of the Reapers. I did try it, but I just felt like our damage was lacking, but that would be my second option if I actually had direct scalers in my gear on different aspects for our damage. For the mages, I am using the base Shadow Mage. It looks like they kind of just do the most damage without having to really worry about them. Bone Mages do more damage, but they die all the time, and then you need to use corpses to be able to resurrect them, and that's corpses you're not using for damage. So I just felt like this was a net negative. The benefit here is that they have a 10% chance to apply stun. And again, not only is just stun great for survivability, but it's going to, again, increase our corpse explosion damage from the plagued enhancement. Now, I wish I could show you a lot of like crazy good gear, but we just don't have it. I just took everything off of my Barbarian that I could literally equip on this character, and then I found a couple aspects that kind of work together. The most important thing that I would say is you can find ranks to corpse skills. So this is going to increase our corpse explosion even further and make our corpse tendrils more effective. In addition to that, now let me just find it here. We have +1 rank to Blood Surge. I know that you can get up to +2 rank at a higher item power. So anything that's going to give you Blood Surge or Corpse Explosion, and then anything that's going to give you some access to the passives, if those are skills that you can find on the rest of your gear. I actually found Corpse Tendrils on a pair of boots. I'm no longer wearing it, but that actually gave me access to it before I even had the skill points to do it. So you can actually speed into this build a bit sooner and pick up the Plagued Corpse Explosion enhancement sooner if you happen to find those on the character. But other than that, we just have basic skills are granting us damage reduction. You can see this is literally my Barbarian helmet. Useless armor. The plus to Blood Surge here. Damaging an elite enemy grants us barrier. This isn't super important for the survivability, but we also have an aspect that says that we deal 31% increased damage while we have barrier active. So again, this is a way for us to be able to scale damage better against elite monsters where we are the slowest against. So the moment I walk up and hit them one time, I'm just doing 31% damage to them while I have this barrier active, and you basically shouldn't be getting hit because all of your skeletons should be face tanking for you. Anything that can give you movement speed and max evade on the boots, that's literally your only movement speed options. And that's really the most important thing to put down here. For the amulet, I'm currently using the Blood Surge's Nova Echoes and hits again. Putting it onto the amulet makes it 50% more effective, meaning it deals more of your total damage. I think normally this deals like 70% of base Nova damage. I'm sorry, this actually deals 70% less base damage than Nova if you just put on a random piece of gear, but on the amulet, it's down to less than 50%. So you're actually getting 53% of your overall Nova Surge damage, which is nice to help increase that. We just were able to put this onto an amulet. The other things I currently have are basic skills, gain additional attack speed, just makes resource generation that much faster. And then for a weapon, I'm looking for anything that's going to give me personally damage to crowd control, damage to close enemies, vulnerable damage, and stats. This weapon was just a really good example of all of that. And then in addition to it, whenever I use a basic skill to generate resource, my core skill will do more damage. And that will apply to, again, both parts of the Blood Surge, and if it's empowered currently, it will apply to the empowered damage as well. I think ultimately finding something that scales corpse explosion damage, putting it onto a two-handed weapon is probably the best option. I haven't found a lot of Necro specific gear, and I haven't determined whether or not you can get plus to skills on Necro gear in the weapon slots. So this very well may change, but I think a big two-handed weapon, just be able to scale all your damage as aggressively as possible. And then again, damage to close monsters, damage to crowd control, or damage to vulnerable, since we're able to very consistently apply vulnerable damage. As far as gems or jewels to put into here, it kind of goes either way. The basic skill damage from the topaz is kind of useless since hemorrhage really doesn't do damage for us. So I'd rather have rubies in here, which will increase overpower damage if you're just looking for a way to min-max that. Is there anything else that I really need to go over for you to understand the character? I don't believe so. Just thinking about what the Necromancer has available to them, again, I think plus skills as well as anything that's able to scale our corpse explosion damage, I just haven't found an aspect yet, but I've only been playing the second part of the beta for the 4 hours that it took me to get to level 25 and make this video. So as I get more information, as I find better aspects, I'll obviously update this, and then any additional builds that are going to be coming will hopefully be up on Max Roll soon. Look forward to that tomorrow on Saturday. I'm going to go ahead and test every other setup that I can on the Necromancer. So right now I'm thinking that there's a summon based build, a pure bone based build, a pure blood based build, and then something in the realm of damage over time, AoE shadow damage. And I'm basically going to pour tons of hours into it, trying to get that out as soon as possible. In addition to that, if you are around tomorrow, Saturday, starting at 3 p.m. ET, I'm actually taking over the official Xbox Twitch channel to bring you coverage of Diablo 4. So by that time, I hope to have everything on the Necromancer tested, so I'll be showcasing what I think the best build is. That's at twitch.tv/Xbox. Thank you, and just shout outs to Microsoft, Xbox, and Blizzard for that opportunity. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you there. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.